Hello everyone, and welcome back to Shadowman Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story.
My name is Marcus Donovan, but everyone calls me Mac. I've been a park ranger at Denali for 19 years now, and I need to tell you something that happened back in March of '84. Something the National Park Service doesn't want you to know about. If you're planning to visit Alaska's backcountry, you need to hear this story first. I was 44 then, stationed at Wonder Lake Research Station, 85 miles deep in the park. It's beautiful country, nothing but white tundra and black spruce trees stretching to the horizon, with Denali herself rising like a ghost in the distance. In winter, you can only get there by dog sled. No roads, no phones, just you and the wilderness. I loved it out there. After Vietnam, after my divorce, after losing touch with my kids back in Oregon, the silence felt like medicine. I'd spent 4 years in the Marines getting shot at in jungles, then another 15 years watching my marriage fall apart. Alaska gave me peace. The Athabascan people who lived here for thousands of years had a different name for Wonder Lake. They called the valley around it Hungry Valley and wouldn't hunt there, especially not in winter. Old Joe Tuntatuliak, who guided for the park sometimes, told me his grandfather used to say the spirits there were always starving. Just campfire stories, I'd tell him. Something to keep kids from wandering off. Joe would shake his head. Not stories, Mac, warnings. I figured he was talking about regular dangers, hypothermia, avalanches, getting lost. Alaska's got plenty of ways to kill you without adding monsters to the list. That March, I was out there with a research team studying how climate change was affecting caribou migration. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was the lead scientist, a climatologist from the University of Alaska. She had 2 people with her, Dr. Paul Zhang, a geologist, and Dr. Anne Rodriguez, a physicist studying ice patterns. Good people, smart people, the kind who asked lots of questions and actually listened to the answers. The weather had been getting weird all month. We kept getting these sudden temperature drops that would hit like a slap. The caribou were moving through earlier than usual, and they seemed nervous, bunching up tight and moving fast instead of grazing. Even the ravens were acting strange. Ravens are tough birds. They'll eat anything and go anywhere. But they started avoiding certain parts of the valley. I'd see them flying overhead and suddenly veer off like they hit an invisible wall. On March 18th, Dr. Mitchell came to me with something that changed everything. Mac, she said, holding up a plastic bag with what looked like bone fragments. We found these near the old hunting grounds, about 12 miles north. I need you to take a look. The bones were white and clean, which was odd. In Alaska, bones get yellow and cracked from weather. These looked fresh, but the dating suggested they were decades old. Here's the weird part, Dr. Zhang added. They were arranged, not scattered by scavengers or weather. Arranged. Arranged how? In a circle, and there were more bones hung up in the trees, 15 feet off the ground. I felt something cold crawl up my spine, but I pushed it down. Could be an old burial site that got disturbed. Maybe an avalanche moved things around. Dr. Mitchell shook her head. No avalanche damage. And Mac, there's something else. The local wildlife won't go near the site. No tracks, no scat, nothing. It's like they're avoiding it. That's when I should have called for a helicopter and gotten everyone out. But you don't work 19 years in the wilderness by running from every weird thing you can't explain. Besides, the weather was turning. We had a storm coming in that would ground any aircraft for days. I'll check it out tomorrow, I told them. If it's human remains, we need to document everything properly. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Joe's grandfather and his warnings about hungry spirits, about the ravens changing course, about bones arranged in circles 15 feet up in trees. Outside, the wind was picking up. The weather radio said we were in for a bad one, temperatures dropping to 40 below with winds up to 60 miles per hour. A real Alaska storm that could last for days. I lay in my bunk, listening to the wind build, and I could swear I heard something else mixed in with it, something like singing, but that was impossible. The station was in the middle of nowhere, and we were the only people for 85 miles. The next morning, the storm hit full force. Snow came down so thick I couldn't see the generator shed 20 feet from the cabin. The wind howled like something alive and angry. I suited up anyway, full winter gear, snowshoes, emergency pack. In weather like this, 12 miles could take 8 hours, but I had a job to do. "You sure about this?" Dr. Mitchell asked as I checked my compass. "This storm's only getting worse." "I've been out in plenty of storms, Tit," I told her. "Besides, if we wait, the site might get buried under 10 feet of snow." The hike was brutal. Even with snowshoes, I was breaking through crust up to my knees. The wind cut through my parka like it was made of paper, but I'd done worse in Vietnam and I'd done worse in Alaska. What bothered me was the silence under the wind. No birds, no small animals rustling in the brush. Nothing. Just white noise and the crunch of my own footsteps. I found the site exactly where Dr. Mitchell said it would be, and immediately I knew something was very wrong. The bones were arranged in a perfect circle, about 10 feet across, ribs, leg bones, what looked like parts of a skull. But whoever had done this hadn't just laid them on the ground. They'd pressed them down into the snow and ice like they were planting seeds. In the center of the circle was a single footprint. Not a boot print, a bare footprint. In snow that was 40 below zero, the footprint was huge, at least 18 inches long, with what looked like claw marks at the ends of the toes. I took pictures with my camera, measured everything, made notes. Standard procedure. But my hands were shaking, and it wasn't from the cold. Then I looked up and saw the rest of it. Hanging from the branches of a black spruce tree 15 feet off the ground was a complete rib cage. It was tied up there with what looked like sinew, swaying in the wind like some kind of sick wind chime. There was no way any normal animal could have gotten it up there. And there were no ladder marks in the snow, no disturbed branches, nothing to show how it had gotten there. I was taking pictures of the tree when my GPS started acting up. The display kept showing impossible locations, sometimes in the middle of Denali itself, sometimes in the ocean 100 miles away. Then my compass started spinning like a top. That's when I heard the singing. It was coming from deeper in the woods, just barely audible over the wind. A low, droning sound that seemed to be in a language I'd never heard before. It made my teeth hurt. I followed the sound for about 50 yards, my heart pounding harder with each step. The singing got louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from one voice. It was a chorus of voices, all humming the same impossible tune. Then suddenly it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the singing. It was complete. No wind, no trees creaking, nothing. Like the whole world was holding its breath. I turned to head back to the bone circle, and that's when I saw the tracks. They led from the tree with the ribcage straight toward where I was standing. Huge prints, the same as the one in the circle, but these were fresh. The edges were sharp, the snow around them undisturbed. Someone, or something, had followed me to this spot. I spun around, scanning the trees. Nothing but white snow and black branches, but I could feel eyes watching me. The kind of feeling you get when you're in a sniper's crosshairs. I got out of there fast. The hike back to the station took forever. The storm was getting worse, and I kept hearing things that shouldn't have been there. footsteps crunching in snow behind me. That singing starting up again from different directions. Once, I could swear I heard Dr. Mitchell calling my name, but when I looked back, there was nothing but blowing snow. By the time I reached the station, I was exhausted and spooked. The research team was huddled around the radio, trying to reach park headquarters. "Any luck?" I asked. "Nothing," Dr. Jung said. "It's like we're in a dead zone. Even the emergency frequency is just static." I told them what I'd found, leaving out some of the stranger details. No point in panicking anyone before I understood what was happening. "So it's definitely human remains?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "Looks like it. Could be old Athabascan burials that got disturbed somehow." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The Athabascan people didn't bury their dead in trees, and they sure didn't arrange bones in circles. That night, the temperature dropped to 45 below. The windows started icing over from the inside, even though we had the heater running full blast. And somewhere around midnight, Dr. Mitchell started talking in her sleep. She was speaking in the same language I'd heard in the woods, the same impossible words that had made my teeth hurt. I lay in my bunk, listening to her mumble in a language that shouldn't exist, and I started to understand that we were in serious trouble. The next morning, Dr. Mitchell was different. She wouldn't eat breakfast, just sat at the table, staring at the radio with glassy eyes. "Sarah, you okay?" I asked. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me for a second. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired," she said. "Had strange dreams." "What kind of dreams?" "I was so hungry," she whispered. "Hungrier than I've ever been, but when I tried to eat, the food turned to dust in my mouth." Dr. Jang was checking the weather radio. "Storm's supposed to last at least 3 more days," he announced. "We're stuck here until it passes." That's when we heard the first howl. It came from outside, cutting through the wind like a knife through silk. Not a wolf howl, I'd heard plenty of those. This was deeper, more human, but wrong in ways I couldn't put into words. Dr. Rodriguez went to the window and tried to scrape away the ice to look out. "I don't see anything," she said. But her voice was shaking. The howl came again, closer this time. It seemed to go on forever, rising and falling in notes that made my bones ache. When it finally stopped, the silence felt like a physical weight. "That's not a wolf," Dr. Jang said. "No," I agreed. "It's not." Around noon, things got worse. I was checking the generator when I found tracks around the station. The same huge clawed prints I'd seen at the bone site. They circled the building 3 times, coming right up to the walls. At one point, the tracks went directly under a window that was 8 feet off the ground. Whatever was making those tracks was tall enough to look into our windows. I followed the tracks as far as I dared, but they just led off into the white void of the storm. When I came back inside, Dr. Mitchell was gone. "Where's Sarah?" I asked. Dr. Rodriguez looked up from her equipment. She said she was going to the bathroom. That was 20 minutes ago. The bathroom was a small outhouse connected to the main cabin by a covered walkway. I checked there first. Empty. Then I checked her bunk, the storage room, everywhere. Dr. Mitchell was nowhere in the building. I suited up and went back outside. The storm was so bad, I could barely see my own feet, but I had to find her. Nobody could survive more than a few minutes outside in these conditions. I found her 100 yards from the station, sitting naked in the snow. She was alive, but barely. Her lips were blue and her skin was white as the snow around her. When I tried to help her up, she fought me. "I have to wait," she kept saying. "They're coming. They're so hungry, and they're coming." It took both Dr. Jang and me to carry her back inside. We wrapped her in blankets and got her close to the heater. She was hypothermic, but conscious. "What were you doing out there?" I asked, when she could finally talk. "Following the singing," she said. "It was so beautiful, like a dinner bell." That made my blood run cold. "What's singing?" "You can't hear it. It's everywhere. They're calling us to dinner." Dr. Rodriguez was checking Sarah's hands and feet for frostbite when she stopped and went pale. "Mac," she said quietly. "Look at this." Dr. Mitchell's fingernails were gone. Not broken off or torn. Gone, like she'd gnawed them off herself. And when I looked closer, I could see bite marks on her fingertips where she'd been chewing. "Sarah," I said carefully. "Did you hurt yourself?" She looked at her hands like she was seeing them for the first time. "I was so hungry," she whispered. So hungry." That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat by the radio trying every frequency I knew, sending out Mayday calls on the emergency channels, nothing but static. Around 3 a.m. the howling started again. This time it was coming from multiple directions like we were surrounded, and mixed in with the howls I could hear that singing. Dr. Jang woke up and came to sit next to me. "Mac," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. I've been having dreams too." "What kind of dreams?" "I'm eating and eating, but I'm never full. And the more I eat..." He paused and looked at his hands. "The more I want to eat things I shouldn't want to eat." Before I could ask what he meant, we heard footsteps on the roof. Heavy footsteps pacing back and forth above our heads. Something big was walking on the cabin roof, and from the sound of it, it was in no hurry to leave. The footsteps continued for an hour. Every few minutes, we'd hear a scratching sound like claws dragging across the metal roofing. Then around 4 a.m., everything went silent. When morning came, I climbed up to check the roof. The scratches were there, carved deep into the metal. But what scared me more were the footprints in the snow around the building. There were dozens of them now, all the same impossible size, all with those claw marks. They circled the cabin over and over, getting closer with each circuit. And leading away from the cabin toward the deeper woods was a set of smaller human footprints. Dr. Jang was gone. I found Dr. Jang's body 3 miles from the station, at the top of the radio tower. There was no ladder, no way anyone could have climbed 50 feet of icy metal in a blizzard. But there he was, frozen solid, sitting at the very top, like he'd just decided to take a rest. His face was peaceful, almost smiling, but his hands were covered in blood from where he'd clawed his way up the tower. Every fingernail was torn off, every finger scraped to the bone. In his lap was a note written in his own blood. "So hungry, so very hungry." I left him there. In that storm, trying to get him down would have killed me too. When I got back to the station, Dr. Rodriguez was in bad shape. She was sitting at the table with a fork, stabbing at her own palm over and over. "Anne," I grabbed the fork away from her. "What are you doing?" She looked at me with eyes that weren't quite her own anymore. "Testing if I'm ready," she said. "They won't take us unless we're ready." "Ready for what?" "To be eaten. We have to be so hungry that we'll eat anything, even ourselves." That's when I understood. Whatever was out there, it didn't just kill people. It infected them somehow, made them crazy with hunger until they hurt themselves. I tied Dr. Rodriguez to her chair with climbing rope. She didn't fight me, just kept muttering about being ready for dinner. As the sun set on our 4th day trapped in the storm, I heard Joe Tuntatuliak's voice calling my name from outside. "Mac, help me! The dogs are hurt!" I knew it wasn't really Joe. Joe was safe in the village, 85 miles away. But the voice was perfect, down to his accent, and the way he called my name. I ignored it and checked my weapons. I had a .45 service pistol and a flare gun. Not much against something that could put a man 50 feet up a radio tower. The fake Joe kept calling for another hour. Sometimes he was hurt, sometimes he was lost, sometimes he was bringing help, but it was never really Joe. Around midnight, something started trying to get in. It began with scratching at the walls, then moved to the windows. I could hear it testing the door, pushing against it with enormous strength. The whole cabin shook with each impact. Dr. Rodriguez had gone quiet in her chair. When I looked at her, she was smiling. "They're here," she whispered. "Finally." The scratching stopped. For a long moment, everything was silent. Then the wall beside the door began to crack. Something was coming through the solid log wall like it was made of paper. The wood split and splintered, and a hand pushed through. A massive hand with black claws the length of kitchen knives. The hand was followed by an arm, then a head that shouldn't have been able to fit through the opening. The thing that came through my wall was 12 feet tall and thin as a skeleton. Its skin was grey-white like old ice, and it was covered in frost that never melted. Its face was almost human, but stretched wrong, with eyes that were too big and a mouth full of broken teeth. It moved like smoke, flowing through the gap in the wall instead of walking. When it was fully inside, it stood there looking at me with those impossible eyes. "Hello, Mac," it said in Joe's voice. "I've been so very hungry." I shot it 6 times with the .45. The bullets passed right through it like it was made of mist. The thing that looked like a nightmare reached out and touched Dr. Rodriguez on the forehead. She screamed once, then began laughing. A high, broken sound that went on and on. "She understands now," the creature said. "She's ready to feed us properly." Dr. Rodriguez started gnawing on her own wrist, still tied to the chair, still laughing. I grabbed the flare gun and fired it right into the creature's chest. This time, something happened. The thing stumbled backward, and where the flare hit, its skin began to smoke and burn. It let out a howl that shattered every piece of glass in the cabin. Then it flowed back through the wall and vanished into the storm. But I knew it would be back. And next time I might not be so lucky. That's when I heard a new sound from outside, dogs barking and a sled approaching. This time it really was Joe Tuntatuliak. Joe found me huddled by the heater, holding the flare gun with shaking hands. Dr. Rodriguez was unconscious in her chair, her wrists chewed raw. "Mac," he said quietly, "we need to talk." "How did you get here?" "The storm." "Storm's breaking up, should be clear by morning." He looked around the destroyed cabin, taking in the broken wall, the scratched roof, the blood on the floor. "But that's not why I came." Joe sat down across from me and pulled out a small leather pouch. "My grandfather told me if this ever happened again, I'd need to come help. Been watching for the signs for 40 years. "What signs?" "Animals acting wrong, weather turning bad for no reason, people going missing in ways that don't make sense." He gestured toward the hole in the wall. "Things coming through walls." Joe opened the pouch and showed me what was inside: bone needles, dried plants, and what looked like tobacco. "Grandfather's medicine," he explained, "for fighting the Wendigo." "The what?" "Hunger spirit, ancient thing that feeds on human desperation and winter madness. Makes people so hungry they'll eat anything, even themselves. Then it feeds on them." "That's impossible." Joe looked at Dr. Rodriguez, still unconscious in her chair with her bloody wrists. "You think this is possible?" He had a point. "Wendigo gets stronger every time it feeds," Joe continued. "Been sleeping under the ice for decades, but climate change broke the barriers my great-grandfather put in place. It's awake now and it's hungry." Outside I could hear that terrible howling starting up again. "It'll be back," Joe said. "And this time it'll bring friends. We need to be ready." Joe worked, quickly, sprinkling the dried plants around the cabin and lighting small fires at specific points. He gave me some of the tobacco to chew. "Tastes awful," I said. "It's supposed to. Wendigo can't stand sacred tobacco. Makes us taste wrong to them." The howling was getting closer. Multiple voices now harmonizing in that awful song I'd heard in the woods. "Joe," I said, "if this thing is so powerful, how do we kill it?" "You don't kill a Wendigo," he said. "You can only drive it away, make it go back to sleep under the ice." He lit the last of his small fires just as something crashed into the wall outside. The whole cabin shook. "Fire," Joe said. "Sacred fire blessed by the old ceremonies. It's the only thing they fear." The scratching started again, but this time when the creature tried to come through the wall, it stopped. I could see its massive hand pressed against the logs, but it couldn't push through. "The sacred smoke," Joe explained, "creates a barrier they can't cross. But barriers work both ways. We were safe inside, but we were also trapped." For 6 hours the creatures circled the cabin. I counted at least 3 different voices in their howling chorus. They tested every wall, every window, but the sacred fires kept them out. When dawn broke, the howling stopped. Joe and I ventured outside to find huge tracks everywhere, but no sign of the creatures themselves. "They'll sleep now," Joe said. "Wendigo are winter spirits. They're weaker in daylight." A search helicopter found us that afternoon. The official report blamed everything on extreme weather exposure and altitude psychosis. The research station was permanently closed and the area was declared off limits to all future expeditions. Dr. Rodriguez spent 3 months in a psychiatric hospital. She recovered physically, but she never talked about what happened out there. Last I heard, she'd moved to Florida and refused to go anywhere it snowed. I transferred to a park in Arizona the next year. Couldn't handle the isolation anymore. Couldn't handle winter. Every time I heard wind in the trees, I'd think about that terrible singing. Joe went back to his village and worked with the tribal council to restore the old spiritual protections around Hungry Valley. They perform ceremonies there every winter now, keeping the Wendigo asleep under the ice. But climate change is making the winters shorter and warmer. Joe's getting old and not many young people know the old ways anymore. That's why I'm telling you this story. If you're ever in Alaska's backcountry and the wildlife goes silent, if you start thinking about food when you're not hungry, if you hear singing in languages that don't exist, get out immediately. Don't wait for help. Don't try to document it. Don't think you can handle it. Just run. Because somewhere under the melting ice of Alaska, ancient hungers are stirring, and they're always looking for their next meal. My name is Catherine Sullivan, but everyone calls me Kate. I've been a park ranger here at Glacier Bay for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Alaskan waters could throw at me. I was wrong. People think being a ranger is all about hiking trails and campfire talks, but here in Glacier Bay, most of my work happens on the water. I patrol the fjords in my boat, watching for whales, checking on seal colonies, and making sure tourists don't get too close to the glaciers. The ice can kill you faster than you'd think. I used to be in the Coast Guard, spent 6 years pulling people out of freezing water, watching hypothermia turn strong swimmers into helpless victims in minutes. That's why I know these waters so well. Every current, every hidden rock, every place where the ice likes to carve and send house-sized chunks crashing into the sea. The Tlingit people who lived here before us had stories about these waters, stories about creatures called kushtaka, shapeshifters that looked like otters but could take human form. They said these spirits would steal your soul and drag you down to live underwater forever. I always figured those were just old tales to explain why so many people drowned in these unforgiving seas. June is our busiest season. 20 hours of daylight bring tourists from all over the world. They come to see the whales, the glaciers, the pristine wilderness. Most have no idea how dangerous this place really is. The water temperature stays around 45 degrees even in summer. Fall overboard without a survival suit and you've got maybe 15 minutes before your body shuts down. That's why what happened to the research team made no sense. Dr. Marcus Webb and his 2 graduate students had been studying seal populations near the Marjorie Glacier for 3 weeks. They were experienced, careful researchers. Webb had worked in Antarctic waters for 20 years. His students, Sarah Chen and Miguel Santos, were both certified divers with Arctic experience. I found their boat on a Tuesday morning, drifting empty about 2 miles from the glacier face. Everything was wrong about it. The engine was off, but not damaged. All their safety gear was still aboard: life jackets, survival suits, emergency beacon. The radio worked fine. Their diving equipment was laid out on deck like they'd just finished a dive, but their logbook showed they hadn't planned any underwater work that day. 3 experienced researchers don't just vanish from a perfectly good boat in calm water. I called the Coast Guard and started the search immediately. Standard man overboard procedures, grid pattern, thermal imaging, underwater sonar. We checked every ice floe, every rocky outcrop, every place they might have climbed out of the water. Nothing. But that wasn't the strangest part. The strangest part was what we found when we checked their research data. The underwater microphones Webb's team had placed near the seal colony recorded something that made my skin crawl. I listened to it 3 times before I believed what I was hearing. It started as normal seal sounds, barking, splashing, the usual chatter of a healthy colony. Then, around 3 a.m. the night before they disappeared, everything changed. The seals went completely silent. Not the gradual quiet you get when a predator approaches, but instant, total silence. Then came the singing. That's the only way I can describe it. A low, haunting melody that seemed to come from underwater. But it wasn't whale song. I know every sound whales make. This was different, structured, almost like a lullaby, if lullabies could make your teeth ache and your head pound. The Coast Guard lieutenant, a tough guy named Rodriguez, who'd seen 20 years of rescues, listened to the recording once and handed the headphones back to me. "That's not natural," he said. "No animal makes sounds like that." We expanded the search, brought in divers from Juneau. The water was crystal clear, visibility good, down to about 60 feet. But the divers started reporting strange things, shapes moving too fast to be seals, shadows that didn't match anything on the surface. And twice, divers swore they saw things walking upright on the sea floor, too far down and too dark to make out clearly. I should have listened to Mary Katzik. Mary is an elder from the local Tlingit community, a small woman in her 70s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue. She came to the ranger station the day after we found the empty boat. "You need to stay away from the glacier," she told me. "The ice spirits are angry. The glacier has been retreating too fast, disturbing places that should stay buried." I respected Mary, but I couldn't base a search and rescue operation on folklore. "Mary, 3 people are missing. We have to keep looking." "Missing?" she said, shaking her head. "Not missing. Taken. The Kushtaka are waking up because the ice is melting. They're hungry for souls." She left me a small carved pendant, whalebone etched with symbols I didn't recognize. "Wear this when you go on the water," she said. "And whatever you do, don't let them touch you. Once they touch you, they can call you back." I put the pendant in my pocket and went back to organizing search teams, but her words stuck with me. The glacier had been retreating faster than usual this year. Climate change was exposing areas that had been under ice for centuries. Who knew what was buried under all that frozen water? 3 days later, we found the second boat. This one belonged to a wildlife photographer named James Wright. Like Webb's team, Wright was experienced and careful. His boat was found drifting near the same area, engine off, all safety equipment aboard. But unlike the research vessel, Wright's boat showed signs of something else. Claw marks. They ran along both sides of the hull just below the waterline. Deep gouges in the fiberglass, evenly spaced like finger marks. But they were too big for human hands, and no known marine animal in these waters had claws that could make marks like those. I measured them carefully. 7 inches from tip to tip, curved like claws but with an opposable thumb. Whatever made them had hands. Intelligent hands. Wright's camera was still aboard, and when we developed the film, the last few shots made my blood run cold. They showed the water around his boat turning dark like something massive was rising from below. In the final frame, you could just make out shapes in the water, sleek forms that looked almost like seals, but wrong somehow, too large, too human. That night I dreamed I was swimming in ice-cold water, but instead of being afraid, I felt perfectly comfortable. In my dream, voices called to me from the depths, speaking English but with an accent I couldn't place. "Come down," they said. "Come join us. The water is warm once you accept it." I woke up, gasping, my sheets soaked with sweat despite the cool cabin air. The pendant Mary had given me was warm against my skin. The calls started coming in on the 4th day. Tourist boats reporting unusual seal behavior near the glacier. But when I pressed for details, the stories didn't make sense. They were swimming in formation, one boat captain told me. Like they were organized. And when we got close, they all turned to look at us at the same time. Seals don't do that. Another captain reported seeing seals on an ice floe that seemed to be wearing something. "Looked like clothing," he said. "Dark fabric around their bodies, but that's impossible, right?" I decided to see for myself. I took my patrol boat out early, before the tourist vessels started their runs. The morning was foggy, which wasn't unusual, but this fog felt different, thicker. It seemed to muffle sound in strange ways. I could hear the engine of my boat perfectly, but the normal sounds of the bay, birds, waves, distant glacier cracks, were completely absent. I was about a mile from the glacier when I saw them. At first, they looked like a normal seal colony resting on an ice floe, maybe 20 animals, dark shapes against the white ice. But as I got closer, something was wrong with their proportions. Too tall, too narrow. I stopped the boat and grabbed my binoculars. What I saw through those lenses changed everything. They weren't seals. They were figures in dark, wet clothing sitting upright on the ice. Human figures, but wrong somehow. Too fluid in their movements, too comfortable in the freezing cold. And they were all looking directly at me. One of them stood up. Even at a distance, I could tell it was tall, maybe 7 feet. It raised one arm, and the gesture was unmistakably human, a wave, a greeting, or a summons. My engine died. I tried the starter. Nothing. The engine had been running perfectly seconds before, but now it wouldn't even turn over. My radio crackled with static, and through the interference I heard something that made my hands shake, singing. The same underwater melody from Webb's recordings, but now it was coming through my radio, clear and beautiful and wrong. The fog began to thicken around my boat, and I lost sight of the ice floe, but I could hear splashing sounds getting closer, multiple shapes moving through the water with unnatural speed. Then I saw them in the water around my boat, sleek forms just beneath the surface, pacing me in perfect circles. Occasionally one would surface, and I'd catch a glimpse of a face that was almost human, but not quite. Features too sharp, eyes too large, skin with a wet, oily sheen that wasn't quite right. One surfaced right beside my boat, close enough to touch. It looked up at me with intelligent eyes and smiled, showing teeth that were too sharp and too many. When it spoke, its voice was perfectly human. "Hello, Kate," it said. "We've been waiting for you." My hand found the pendant in my pocket, and the creature's smile faltered. It slipped back under the water, and suddenly my engine roared to life. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I gunned the throttle and headed back to shore, the boat's wake white behind me as I fled. But I could feel them following me, just under the surface, keeping pace effortlessly. They followed me all the way back to the harbour and only disappeared when I reached the dock. That evening, my diving partner, Tom Henricks, called in from his patrol. "Kate, I need you to hear this," his voice came over the radio, tight with fear. "I'm about 5 miles north of your position this morning. I found something." He'd discovered what looked like a camp on a small island, but it wasn't a human camp. Arranged in perfect circles were collections of personal items, wallets, jewelry, glasses, cell phones, all the things that might have belonged to the missing people. But the items were arranged with care, almost ceremonially, and they were all perfectly clean, despite being outdoors for days. "Kate," Tom's voice crackled again. "There's something else. I can hear them singing underwater. And I swear I recognize one of the voices. It sounds like Dr. Webb." The radio went dead. I found Tom's boat the next morning, floating empty like the others. But this time was different. This time I could see shapes in the water around it, no longer hiding. They looked like people wearing sleek, dark suits that gleamed wet in the morning light. But their movements in the water were too fluid, too fast. They could dive and surface without breathing apparatus, staying underwater for impossible lengths of time. As I approached Tom's boat, they surrounded mine, not threatening, but making it clear I wasn't leaving. One of them climbed onto my boat with movements that were graceful and wrong. Up close, I could see it had once been human. The features were distorted but recognizable. Elongated limbs, skin with a rubbery texture, eyes that were larger and darker than they should be. But it wore clothes, spoke clearly, and moved with obvious intelligence. "Dr. Webb?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "I was," the thing said in Webb's voice, though deeper and with an odd echo. "Now I am something better, something adapted. The Kushtaka showed me the truth about these waters." "Where are Tom and the others?" "Learning to breathe underwater. Learning to be free of the surface world's limitations. You could join us, Kate. The water is calling to you. I can see it in your dreams." He was right. Every night since the disappearances began, I dreamed of swimming in the deep, cold water. And each night, the dreams felt more real, more appealing. "The glacier's retreat has awakened our colony," Webb continued. 200 years ago, your people's diseases killed most of us. The survivors made a bargain with the Kushtaka, life in the deep waters in exchange for our human forms. But we've been alone too long. We need new members. Fresh souls to strengthen the community. More figures climbed onto my boat. I recognized Sarah Chen, Miguel Santos, and Tom Henricks. All changed, all wrong, but undeniably alive. "It doesn't hurt," Sarah said, her voice like water over rocks. "The transformation is like falling asleep and waking up new, stronger, able to survive in any water, breathe beneath the waves, swim faster than any surface vessel." They reached for me with hands that were still mostly human, and I felt the pendant in my pocket grow warm. "No," I said, backing toward the steering wheel. "This isn't evolution. This is death." Tom tilted his head, studying me. "Is it? We're still ourselves, Kate. Just better. Adapted for a world where the surface is becoming unlivable, the ice is melting, the oceans are rising. We're the future." but when he smiled, his teeth had changed, sharper, made for tearing. I grabbed the emergency flare gun from under the steering wheel. "Kate," Webb said, still sounding reasonable, "don't make this difficult. You can't fight us in the water, and eventually you'll have to come to the water." He was right, but I wasn't planning to fight them in the water. I fired the flare directly into the boat's fuel tank. The explosion threw me overboard into the freezing bay, but it also scattered the creatures. For a moment, I was alone in the water, my survival suit protecting me from the worst of the cold. But only for a moment. They were faster in the water than they had been on the boat. Much faster. I felt hands grab my legs, my arms, pulling me down toward the dark bottom of the bay. But as they touched me, the pendant Mary had given me flared with heat. The creatures recoiled, their grips loosening. "The grandmother's mark," Webb hissed, his voice distorted by the water. "She's good."
Protected. I kicked toward the surface, lungs burning. The creatures followed but kept their distance, circling like sharks but unable to touch me directly. Then I heard it, singing, but not from the creatures. This was different, older, coming from the shore. Mary Cat Zeke stood on the dock, her voice carrying across the water in a language I didn't understand but that made the creatures writhe in obvious pain. As her song continued, the transformed humans began to change again. The sleek, inhuman adaptations faded, leaving them looking more like the people they had been. But they were still changed, still bound to the water. "You cannot have her," Mary's voice carried across the waves. "She carries the old protections, and you have taken enough." Webb surfaced near me, his face showing something like regret. "This isn't over, Kate. The waters are rising. Soon there will be nowhere else to go but down." They vanished beneath the surface, leaving me alone in the icy bay. The Coast Guard pulled me out of the water 20 minutes later. Severe hypothermia, they said, but I'd live. The official report blamed the disappearances on a series of boating accidents, equipment failures, unexpected weather, human error. The transformed researchers were listed as missing, presumed drowned. But I knew better. Mary helped me understand what had really happened. The Kushtaka weren't just folklore. They were real, a type of shapeshifter that had coexisted with the Tlingit people for thousands of years. Most were content to live in the deep waters, occasionally helping drowning swimmers or punishing those who violated the ocean's sanctity. But the ones under the glacier were different. They were the spirits of a Tlingit village that had been buried by ice 2 centuries ago, preserved but changed by their supernatural rescue. Climate change had awakened them, and they were trying to rebuild their community with modern recruits. "The ice held them in balance," Mary explained, as we burned offerings on the beach. "Now the ice is going away, and they're free to act. But they're not evil, just lost. They need to remember how to be at peace." The ceremony Mary performed didn't banish the Kushtaka, but it did establish boundaries. The affected area of the bay was quietly restricted from tourism, officially due to unstable glacier conditions. I worked with the tribal council to ensure the restrictions would be respected and permanent. As for me, I couldn't stay on the water. Every time I tried to patrol the bay, I'd find myself staring at the dark water, remembering how comfortable I'd felt in those dreams of swimming in the depths. The pendant Mary gave me helps, but I can still hear them singing sometimes when the wind is right. I transferred to Denali National Park 6 months later. Dry land, mountains instead of water. But even there, I sometimes wake up from dreams of swimming in cold, dark places where voices
"Call my name." The transformed researchers are still out there. Occasionally, boat crews report seeing figures on distant ice floes or unusual seal behavior near the restricted zone. Tom calls to me sometimes on nights when I'm near any body of water, his voice carrying on the wind, asking me to come back. I won't. But part of me, a part that grows stronger with each dream, wants to. The Kushtaka are patient. They've waited 200 years already. They can wait longer, and every year the ice melts a little more. If you ever find yourself in Alaska's coastal waters, listen to the local warnings, respect the restricted areas, and if you hear singing under the water, whatever you do, don't try to find where it's coming from. Some invitations are too dangerous to accept, no matter how beautiful they sound. My name is James Clearwater, but everyone calls me Jimmy. I've been a park ranger here at Katmai National Park in Alaska for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these volcanic lands could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. It was August 1991, and we were dealing with the worst fire season I'd ever experienced. The drought had turned everything bone dry, and temperatures were hitting 80 degrees, way too hot for this part of Alaska. I was stationed at the fire monitoring post in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, about 50 miles from the nearest village. Most folks don't realize that this whole area is basically a giant ash field from when Mount Katmai blew its top back in 1912. It's like standing on the moon, except there's sulfur gas seeping out of cracks in the ground and the smell of rotten eggs hanging in the air. Being half Yupik, I grew up hearing all kinds of stories from my grandmother. She used to tell tales about smoke demons and strange creatures that lived in the volcanic vents. My Filipino co-workers at the cannery where I worked summers during college had their own scary stories too, something called aswang, shape-shifting monsters that fed on human life force. I always figured these were just old country superstitions, ways for people to explain things they didn't understand. That morning started like any other. I was checking the radio equipment when dispatch crackled through with a report of a wildfire about 10 miles northeast of my station. Standard procedure was to get a crew out there and hit it hard before it could spread. In this dry weather, a small fire could turn into a disaster real quick. I called in a 6-man fire suppression team and met them at the landing zone. These were good men, experienced firefighters who knew volcanic terrain. There was Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran who could read smoke like a book. Miller, our equipment specialist who never met a fire he couldn't put out. Young Patterson, fresh out of fire school but eager to prove himself. Thompson and Walsh, both solid crew members I'd worked with for years. And Kowalski, our team medic, who also happened to be afraid of nothing. We loaded up the helicopter with water tanks, retardant, and all our gear. The pilot, Jenny Morrison, had been flying these mountains for a decade and knew every wind pattern and thermal current. As we flew toward the fire, I could see the smoke column rising in the distance, but something about it looked wrong. "That's weird," Jenny called over the helicopter noise. "Smoke's not behaving right for this wind." She was right. The wind was blowing southeast, but the smoke was spiraling straight up like a tornado, then spreading in all directions. In 15 years of fighting fires, I'd never seen anything like it. When we reached the fire site, what we found made no sense at all. The flames were burning in perfect circles, about 20 feet across each. 3 separate circles, like someone had drawn them with a compass. The fire was moving against the wind direction, and here's the really strange part. It wasn't burning the trees or grass. Instead, it seemed to be consuming animal carcasses scattered around the area. "Jimmy, come look at this," Rodriguez called out, his voice tight with confusion. I walked over to where he was kneeling next to what looked like the remains of a caribou. The bones were bleached white, like they'd been sitting in the desert for years, but everything around them, moss, small shrubs, even paper trash someone had dropped, was completely untouched. "How long you think this animal's been dead?" Rodriguez asked. I knelt down and examined the bones more carefully. Based on decomposition in this climate, I'd say maybe a year, year and a half. "That's what I thought too," he said quietly. "Except I saw this same caribou drinking from the creek yesterday morning when we flew over." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. I stood up and looked around at the other burn circles. Each one had similar bone piles in the center, all bleached white, all looking ancient. "All right, let's get the retardant on these fires and get out of here," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. But when Miller opened the valves on our foam system, the strangest thing happened. The retardant just disappeared. It turned to steam before it even hit the flames. The water from our tanks did the same thing, boiled away instantly. Yet when I held my hand near the fire, it felt cold. Not just cool, but actually cold, maybe 45 degrees. "Boss," Patterson called out nervously, "my temperature gun is reading these flames at 45 degrees Fahrenheit." That was impossible. Fire burns at over 1,000 degrees minimum. This was breaking every law of physics I knew. I was about to call for an immediate evacuation when we heard Jenny's voice crackling over the radio from the helicopter. "Ground team, I've got a problem up here. My instruments are going crazy. Compass is spinning, altimeter is jumping all over the place. I need to get this bird back to base before something goes wrong." "Negative," I radioed back. "We're pulling out now. Something's not right here." But as we started gathering our gear, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The bone piles in each circle weren't just animal remains. Mixed in with the caribou and moose bones were human skulls, old and yellowed, along with metal buttons and rotted fabric scraps that looked like they came from work clothes. Old work clothes, like what the Filipino cannery workers used to wear back in the early 1900s. My grandmother's stories suddenly didn't seem so crazy anymore. We were loading our gear back onto the helicopter when Miller started screaming. I spun around to see him standing in front of one of the burn circles, his whole body rigid, staring at something in the flames. But when I looked where he was pointing, all I could see was the cold fire dancing around those bleached bones. "Miller!" I shouted. What is it?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring, and then he started walking toward the fire. "Miller, stop!" Rodriguez grabbed his arm, but Miller shook him off with surprising strength. He was mumbling something in a language I didn't recognize, walking like a man in a trance. I ran over and tackled him just as he reached the edge of the flames. We both went down hard, rolling in the volcanic ash. When I looked up at his face, his eyes were completely white. No pupils, no iris, just white. "Get him to the chopper!" I yelled. Rodriguez and Thompson grabbed Miller under his arms and dragged him toward the helicopter. He was still mumbling, but now I could make out some words, Filipino words. Which was weird, because Miller was Polish and had never been outside Alaska. We got him strapped into a seat, and Jenny started the engine. As we lifted off, I looked back down at the 3 fire circles. For just a second, I swear I saw shapes moving in the flames, human shapes, dancing. The flight back to base took 20 minutes, and Miller stayed unconscious the whole time. The moment we landed, I called for a medical evacuation. While we waited for the medics, Miller's eyes suddenly snapped open and he grabbed my shirt with both hands. "They're so hungry," he whispered, his voice raw. "Been hungry for so long, since the mountain burned." "Who's hungry, Miller?" "The ones who came over on the boats, from the islands. They brought them here, but the mountain trapped them below. Now they're free." His grip tightened. "They remember the taste." Then he passed out again. The medics flew Miller to Anchorage, and I spent the rest of the day writing up the incident report. What do you write? That experienced firefighter had some kind of breakdown after staring at impossible cold flames that won't burn wood, that he started speaking a language he didn't know? I stuck to the facts I could prove: equipment malfunction, possible gas leak, crew member overcome by fumes. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Miller had said. The ones who came over on the boats from the islands, the Filipino cannery workers. And since the mountain burned, that had to mean the 1912 eruption. The next morning, I drove to the village to talk to Maria Santos, whose grandfather had worked at the old cannery. Maria was in her 70s now, but she still remembered the stories he used to tell. My grandfather never talked much about the old days, she said, as we sat in her kitchen drinking coffee. But when he did, it was always about the ones who disappeared. Disappeared? Batch of workers came over from the Philippines in 1919, maybe 20 men. They were supposed to work the salmon run that summer, but they never made it to the cannery. Search parties found their camp burned out, but no bodies. Just... She paused, looking uncomfortable. Just bones. Old bones, like they'd been there for years. My blood went cold. Maria, did your grandfather ever mention anything called aswang? Her coffee cup clattered against the saucer. Where did you hear that word? One of my crew members said it yesterday after he had an episode near a fire. Maria stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the volcanic peaks in the distance. My grandfather said some of those Filipino workers weren't really workers at all. They were running from something back home, something they brought with them. What kind of something? She turned back to me, her face pale. Shapeshifters. Creatures that fed on human life force. He said the Yupik shamans knew about them, tried to warn the white bosses at the cannery, but nobody listened. Then the mountain exploded, and the creatures got trapped underground with all that volcanic fire to feed on. That's just a story, Maria. Is it? She pointed toward Mount Katmai. You tell me, Jimmy. You grew up hearing your grandmother's stories about smoke demons. You know this land isn't like anywhere else. Some places are thin between worlds. I drove back to my station thinking about what she'd said. Thin between worlds. My grandmother used to say the same thing about certain places in the valley, spots where the spirits could cross over. That evening, I was monitoring radio chatter when I heard Jenny Morrison calling for help. She was making a supply run to one of the remote cabins when her helicopter started experiencing the same instrument failures we'd had the day before. Mayday, mayday, this is Morrison. I'm losing power. Instruments dead, going down hard about 5 miles south of the fire site. I grabbed my emergency gear and called for backup, but the nearest rescue team was 3 hours away. By the time I reached Jenny's crash site, it was getting dark. I found the helicopter on its side in a small clearing, but Jenny was nowhere around. Jenny, I called out. Jenny, where are you? I heard a weak voice coming from the tree line. Jimmy, over here. I found her sitting against a spruce tree, holding her left arm against her chest. Her shoulder was dislocated, and she had a bad gash on her forehead, but she was alive. Thank God, I said, kneeling beside her. What happened? Instruments went crazy again, same as yesterday. But Jimmy... She grabbed my arm with her good hand. Right before I crashed, I saw them. Saw what? People, standing in the fire circles. They looked like they were from the old days. Work clothes, suspenders. But their skin was grey, and when they opened their mouths... She shuddered. No teeth, just flames inside. I helped Jenny back toward the helicopter to wait for the rescue team, but we never made it. Halfway across the clearing, we heard singing. It was coming from the direction of the fire site, maybe half a mile away. Men's voices singing in harmony, but the song was wrong somehow. The melody was beautiful, almost hypnotic, but the language wasn't English or Yupik or even Filipino. It was something older, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. "We need to get out of here," Jenny whispered. But as I helped her stand, I saw lights moving through the trees toward us. Orange lights, flickering like torches. And the singing was getting closer. "Run," I said. We stumbled through the forest as fast as Jenny's injuries would allow, the singing following us. Every time I looked back, the orange lights seemed closer. And now I could smell something sweet in the air, like burned sugar mixed with sulfur. We reached my truck, just as the lights emerged from the tree line. I got one clear look at what was carrying them, and I understood why Miller had screamed. They looked like men, but wrong. Their skin was grey and cracked like old leather, and their eyes glowed orange from the inside. They wore the rotted remains of work clothes from decades past. And when they opened their mouths to sing, flames danced on their tongues. I got Jenny into the truck and gunned the engine. In the rearview mirror, I watched the creatures stop at the edge of the clearing and raise their burning mouths to the sky, singing that impossible song. We didn't stop driving until we reached the village. The rescue team found Miller's body the next morning. He'd somehow gotten out of the hospital in Anchorage and made it all the way back to the fire site, over 200 miles through wilderness. They found him sitting in the center of one of the burn circles, perfectly preserved but completely drained of blood. His skin was white as paper, and his eyes had been burned out from the inside. But his clothes weren't even singed. The coroner couldn't explain how he'd died. No wounds, no sign of struggle, no obvious cause of death. It was like something had simply sucked the life right out of him. I knew better. The Aswang had called him back. That afternoon, I was at the ranger station filing reports when Rodriguez called on the radio. Against my direct orders, he'd taken Patterson and Thompson back to the fire site for further investigation. Young guys think they're bulletproof. "Jimmy, you need to get out here," Rodriguez's voice crackled through heavy static. "The fires are spreading, and they're following something." "Following what?" "Blood trail. We found where Miller walked in from the road. The fire circles are moving along his path, burning everything he touched." "Get out of there right now." "Jimmy, wait. There's something else. The bones in the circles, they're not just from animals anymore. Fresh human remains, still got skin on them." The radio went dead. I grabbed my emergency kit and headed for my truck. But before I could start the engine, Jenny Morrison came limping up to my door. She'd discharged herself from the clinic against medical advice. "I'm going with you," she said. "Jenny, you need to be in a hospital." "Those things killed my helicopter, made me crash. I want answers." She climbed into the passenger seat, her arm still in a sling. "Besides, you'll need someone who knows this area from the air." The drive to the fire site took 45 minutes, and we could see the smoke from 20 miles away. But this wasn't normal wildfire smoke. It was black and oily, rising in spirals that seemed to move with intelligence. When we reached the area where I'd left Rodriguez and the others, their vehicle was still there, but no sign of the crew. The 3 original fire circles had expanded into a line of flames, stretching nearly a quarter mile, following Miller's path from the road. Each new circle was centered on a spot where Miller must have stopped to rest. "Rodriguez!" I called out. "Patterson! Thompson!" My voice echoed across the ash field, but no one answered. Then Jenny grabbed my arm and pointed. "There!" she whispered. 3 figures were standing in the largest fire circle, completely motionless. Even from a distance, I could see their ranger uniforms, but they were standing inside flames that should have killed them instantly. I started walking toward them, Jenny right behind me, despite her injuries. As we got closer, I could see that Rodriguez, Patterson, and Thompson were alive, but not moving. Their eyes were white, like Miller's had been, and that same Filipino language was spilling from their lips in whispers. "They're being drained," Jenny said quietly. "Look at their skin." She was right. All three men were getting paler by the minute, their skin taking on that same paper-white color Miller had when we found his body. But standing behind them in the flames were three other figures, the grey-skinned creatures Jenny and I had seen the night before. They had their hands pressed against the backs of my crew members' heads, and orange light was flowing between them like electricity. "We have to do something," I said. But before I could move, one of the creatures looked up at me and smiled. Its teeth were filed to points, and when it opened its mouth, flames licked out like a serpent's tongue. It spoke in perfect English. "James Clearwater, son of two worlds, we remember your grandmother's people. They trapped us here in the deep fire when the mountain burned. But we are patient. We have fed on the earth's blood for 80 years, growing strong. Now we feed on man's blood again." "Let them go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, they will join the others. Our family grows with each feeding." The creature gestured, and more shapes emerged from the other fire circles, dozens of them, all wearing the rotted clothes of cannery workers from different eras. "Soon we will have enough to walk beyond the ash field, to visit the
village, to feed properly." Rodriguez suddenly screamed, a sound I'd never heard a human make. His body convulsed once, and then he went completely still. The creature behind him had drained the last of his life force. Rodriguez collapsed, but his body began to change. His skin turned grey and cracked. His eyes started to glow orange from within. He was becoming one of them. "The transformation takes time," the lead creature explained, like a teacher giving a lesson. "But our new brother will hunger soon, and there are many people in the village to feed that hunger." Patterson and Thompson were next. I watched in horror as the life was sucked out of them, watched their bodies begin the same terrible transformation. 3 more, Azwang added to the pack. Jenny had been taking photographs with her camera, documenting everything. Smart thinking. If we didn't make it out alive, maybe someone would find the evidence. But the flash from her camera seemed to irritate the creatures. They turned their burning gazes on us. "Your turn, Ranger," the leader said. "You have strong blood, Yupik magic mixed with white man's determination. You will make a powerful addition to our family." The creatures began moving toward us, their feet not quite touching the ground. Behind them, the recently transformed bodies of my crew were starting to stir. "Run," I told Jenny, but she was staring at something behind me, her face white with terror. I turned and saw that we were surrounded. More creatures had emerged from underground. This wasn't just the cannery workers anymore. Some wore the faded uniforms of early park rangers. Others had on the traditional clothing of Yupik people from decades past. All of them grey-skinned, all of them burning with orange fire in their eyes. 80 years of feeding, the leader laughed. Everyone who disappeared in these mountains, everyone who came too close to our fires, all part of our family now. The circle of creatures began closing in. I could feel heat radiating from their bodies, but it wasn't normal heat. It was the kind of warmth that draws the life right out of you, like standing too close to a furnace that burns souls instead of wood. Jenny collapsed beside me, her camera falling into the ash. The proximity to so many Azwang was too much for her injured body to handle. I could see her skin starting to pale. That's when I remembered something my grandmother had told me when I was young. A story about smoke demons and the old ways of fighting them. Yupik shamans had trapped these creatures once before, right here in this valley, using sacred ceremonies and traditional knowledge that went back thousands of years. Maybe it was time to see if the old ways still worked. I pulled Jenny to her feet and started backing toward my truck, but the creatures moved to block our path. We were trapped in the center of their circle, and I could feel that life-draining heat getting
stronger with each passing second. "There's nowhere to run, Ranger," the leader said, his voice like flames crackling over dry wood. "Your people tried to trap us once before, but we are stronger now. We have fed on the mountain's fire for 8 decades. We are part of this land." That's when I realized something important. These weren't just random monsters. They were bound to this specific place, to the volcanic fires that had freed them in 1912. And if my grandmother's stories were true, that also meant they could be bound again. "You're right," I said, trying to buy time while I thought. "Your people and mine have a history. My grandmother told me about the old ceremony, the one that trapped you before." The creature's orange eyes narrowed. "That knowledge died with the old shamans. Your grandmother was just a woman who remembered children's stories." "Maybe. But she also taught me that some stories are really instructions." I was bluffing, hoping my grandmother had told me more than I remembered. But something in the creature's expression told me I was on the right track. It was afraid. "Jenny," I whispered, without taking my eyes off the Aswang leader. "When I say run, head for the truck. Don't stop for anything. I'm not leaving you here." "You have to. Someone needs to tell people what happened. And besides," I slowly reached into my jacket pocket, "I'm going to try something stupid." What I pulled out was a small leather pouch my grandmother had given me when I became a ranger. She'd told me it contained sacred ash from a shaman's fire, mixed with ground salmon bones and blessed with traditional prayers. I'd carried it for 15 years, thinking it was just a family keepsake. The moment the Aswang saw the pouch, they all took a step back. "Impossible," the leader hissed. "That knowledge was lost. Grandmother always said the spirits don't give up their secrets that easily." I opened the pouch and poured some of the mixture into my palm. It was just grey ash and bone dust, but the creatures recoiled like I was holding acid. She taught me the binding words too. Want to hear them? I was still bluffing. I didn't know any binding words, but desperation was making me bold, and fear was making the creatures cautious. "Run, Jenny, now!" She took off toward the truck while I started speaking in Yupik, using every traditional phrase I could remember from childhood. Prayers my grandmother had taught me, hunting songs my grandfather had sung, anything that sounded ceremonial. I had no idea if I was saying the right words, but the Aswang were hanging back, unsure. Then the leader figured out I was faking it. "You know nothing," he snarled, and lunged forward with supernatural speed. I threw the sacred ash directly into his face and dove to the side. Where the ash hit him, his grey skin started to smoke and bubble. He screamed in rage and pain, a sound like a steam engine exploding. The other creatures rushed me all at once. I rolled through the volcanic dust, trying to reach my truck, but there were too many of them. Cold hands grabbed my arms and legs, lifting me into the air. I could feel that terrible draining sensation starting, my life force being pulled out through their touch. That's when Jenny saved my life. She'd reached the truck and found my emergency supplies, including road flares. She lit 3 of them and came running back, swinging the burning flares like weapons. The Aswang dropped me and backed away from the flames, but not because they were afraid of fire. They were afraid of this fire, the artificial flames that had no connection to their volcanic power. "The flares!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. "They can't control them!" Jenny tossed me a flare and we stood back to back, using the red flames to keep the creatures at bay. But I knew it wouldn't last long. We only had maybe 10 minutes before the flares burned out. I had to think of something else. Something that would work longer than road flares and fake sacred ash. And then I remembered the rest of my grandmother's story.
The part about how the original shamans had actually trapped the creatures. They hadn't used magic spells or sacred ceremonies. They'd used the mountain itself. Jenny, I need you to get to the radio in the truck and call park headquarters. Tell them to evacuate the village immediately. What are you going to do? Something incredibly stupid. I pointed toward Mount Katmai in the distance. Those things are connected to the volcanic system. They draw power from it, but that also means the mountain can control them. Jimmy, you can't be serious. The 1912 eruption didn't just free them, it gave them a home. But if the mountain shifted again, if the volcanic vents reopened in the right way, I was thinking about the emergency procedure manual back at the station. In extreme situations, Park Service geologists could trigger controlled volcanic events to prevent larger eruptions. It required special equipment and federal authorization, but it could be done. Call headquarters, I repeated. Emergency Protocol 7. Tell them to prep the volcanic monitoring equipment for controlled detonation. That could kill us all. Maybe. But if these things reach the village... Jenny looked at the circle of Aswang, still held back by our flares but growing bolder. Then she looked at the newly transformed bodies of Rodriguez, Patterson and Thompson, now stirring to life with orange fire in their dead eyes. "How long do I have?" she asked. 20 minutes, maybe 30. She ran for the truck while I kept the creatures back with my flare. The leader was standing just outside the circle of light, his face still smoking from the sacred ash, watching me with predatory intelligence. "Cannot stop us, Ranger. Even if you destroy these bodies, we will..."
Return. We are part of the mountain now, part of the fire itself. Maybe, I said. But my grandmother always told me that sometimes you don't have to win forever. Sometimes you just have to win today. That's when I heard the rumbling beneath our feet. At first I thought it was just another minor earthquake, common in volcanic areas. But the rumbling grew stronger and I realized Jenny had gotten through to headquarters faster than expected. In the distance, I could see helicopters approaching, carrying the emergency geological equipment. The Aswang heard it too. They began moving toward me with desperate urgency, no longer caring about the flare. They knew their time was running out. I threw the flare as far as I could and ran for the truck, but the creatures caught me before I'd gone 10 feet. This time, when they grabbed me, I felt the life being pulled out of my body like water down a drain. My vision started to fade and I could feel my heartbeat slowing down. But just as I was about to lose consciousness, the mountain answered. The controlled detonation wasn't large by volcanic standards, just enough to redirect the underground lava flows and seal off the main volcanic vents that had been feeding the Aswang for 80 years. But the effect was immediate. The creatures holding me suddenly convulsed and let go, their orange eyes flickering like dying light bulbs. All around the ash field, the Aswang began collapsing as their connection to the mountain's fire was severed. The leader made one last attempt to reach me, crawling across the ground with his grey skin cracking and flaking away. "This changes nothing," he wheezed. "We will return." "Not on my watch," I said, and scattered the last of my grandmother's sacred ash over his dissolving form. The creatures crumbled to dust that was immediately scattered by the mountain wind. The supernatural fires went out all at once, leaving only normal burn scars in the ash field. It was over. Jenny found me sitting in the volcanic dust 20 minutes later, when the rescue helicopters finally landed. I was alive, but barely. The life draining had left me weak as a newborn, and it took 3 days in the hospital before I could stand up without help. The official report blamed the deaths of Rodriguez, Patterson, Thompson, and Miller on toxic volcanic gas exposure. The helicopter crash was attributed to instrument failure caused by electromagnetic interference from underground lava flows. The controlled detonation was described as a routine geological survey to monitor volcanic stability. Nobody mentioned shapeshifters or life-draining monsters or Filipino cannery workers who'd been dead for 70 years. The Park Service doesn't believe in that kind of thing, and frankly, most days I wish I didn't either, but I know what really happened in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. And more importantly, I know it's not over. The controlled detonation disrupted the main volcanic feeds that were keeping the Aswang strong, but it didn't destroy them completely. Every few months, I get reports of small fires burning in impossible patterns, always near spots where people disappeared during the early days of the park. Camp stoves that burn cold, hikers who claim they heard singing in languages they don't recognize, photographs that show shapes moving in the flames. The creatures are still here, just weakened and scattered, waiting for the volcanic activity to increase again, waiting for their chance to rebuild their strength, and they will get that chance eventually. This is still active volcanic territory, and the mountain won't stay quiet forever. That's why I've changed my job description. Officially, I'm still a fire management specialist. Unofficially, I've become the keeper of stories. I've spent the last 3 years documenting every disappearance in these mountains, every strange incident, every piece of folklore from the Yupik elders and the Filipino families whose ancestors worked the canneries. I've also been teaching other rangers about the traditional knowledge, how to recognize signs of supernatural activity, which stories are just stories, and which ones are warnings, what to do if they encounter something that doesn't belong in any textbook. Most of them think I'm crazy, and maybe I am, but a few listen, the smart ones, the ones who understand that Alaska is older and stranger than anything they learned in ranger school. Jenny Morrison transferred to a different park after she recovered from the crash. Can't say I blame her, but before she left, she gave me copies of all the photographs she'd taken that night. Evidence, she called it. Insurance, proof that we didn't imagine the whole thing. I keep those photos locked in my desk drawer, along with my grandmother's empty medicine pouch and a detailed map showing every location where Aswang activity has been reported. When I retire someday, I'll pass them all on to whoever takes my place, along with instructions on how to perform the old ceremonies which I finally learned from the village elders. Because the thing about fighting monsters is that it's never really finished. You don't win once and get to go home. You win today, and then you have to get up tomorrow and win again, and again, and again, for as long as you're breathing, for as long as you can stand watch. The village is safe now, at least for the moment. The Aswang are weak and scattered, reduced to feeding on small animals and the occasional unlucky hiker who wanders too far into the deep country. But they're patient creatures. They waited 80 years before, and they can wait 80 more. So I keep watch. Every morning I check the volcanic monitoring stations, looking for signs of increased activity. Every evening I walk the perimeter of the old fire sites, making sure the sacred ash barriers I've placed there are still intact. And every night I listen to the wind through the valley, waiting for the sound of singing in the distance. My grandmother always said that some jobs choose you rather than the other way around. I used to think she was talking about being a park ranger, about protecting the wilderness and the people who visit it. Now I know she was talking about something much older than that, something that goes back to the time when the boundary between worlds was thinner, and certain people were chosen to guard the places where dangerous things might cross over. So if you're ever planning to visit Katmai National Park, let me give you some advice. Stay on the marked trails. Don't investigate strange fires, no matter how curious you get. If you hear singing in the distance, walk the other way. And if you meet a park ranger who tells you stories about smoke demons and shapeshifters, don't assume he's crazy. Sometimes the old stories are the only thing standing between you and something that's very, very hungry. The mountain is quiet now, but mountains don't stay quiet forever. And when Katmai wakes up again, and it will, I'll be here, watching and waiting. Some fires never really go out. They just burn low for a while, gathering strength, until they're ready to consume everything in their path. But as long as there are people who remember the old ways, who know the stories, and understand their true meaning, those fires will never burn unchecked. My name is James Clearwater, and I keep watch in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. It's dangerous work, but somebody has to do it, and the mountain never sleeps. My name is Michael Ironcloud, and I've been a ranger in Alaska for 21 years. People call me Mike. I'm 45 now, and I've seen things in the Brooks Range that would make most folks pack up and never come back. But this place is my home. It's been home to my people, the Inupiat, for thousands of years. I grew up hearing the old stories. Stories about the Adlet, half-human, half-wolf creatures that hunted in the long winter darkness. My grandmother would tell these tales to teach us kids about staying close to home when the snow got deep. Just stories, I always thought. Ways to keep children safe. After high school, I joined the Army Rangers, spent 8 years down in the lower 48, learned modern survival skills and tactical training. But when my service ended, something pulled me back north. Back to the land where my ancestors hunted caribou and lived under the dancing lights of the aurora. I became a park ranger because I wanted to protect this place while helping people understand it. The Brooks Range isn't like other wilderness areas. There are no roads here, no visitor centers, no cell phone towers. When you're out here, you're truly alone. The nearest town is Fairbanks, 300 miles south. If something goes wrong, help might not come for weeks. It was September 1986 when everything changed. Early winter was coming fast that year. The temperature had already dropped to 20 below zero, and the nights stretched for 14 hours. The caribou were starting their migration south, following paths their ancestors had used for centuries. I was based at a small cabin near the Arrogech Peaks, monitoring the caribou herds and watching for poachers. Hunting season was open, but only with proper permits. Most hunters knew better than to come this far north so late in the season. That's when the radio crackled to life. Ranger Ironcloud, this is Fairbanks Dispatch. We have a missing hunting party. 4 licensed hunters overdue by 2 weeks. I picked up the radio. Copy that. Last known location? Their emergency beacon activated near Wolverine Creek, then went silent. Registered flight plan shows they were dropped off by bush plane on September 1st. 2 weeks. In this weather that was bad. Really bad. I'd tracked over 500 missing persons in my career, and I knew what the cold could do to people. After 3 days without shelter, most folks don't make it. I'll head out at first light, I said. That night I checked my gear. GPS unit, compass, emergency radio, cold weather sleeping bag, traditional snowshoes, and my grandfather's hunting knife. I also packed something most rangers don't carry, an old Inupiat star map carved on walrus ivory. My grandfather taught me to navigate by the stars, the way our people had done for generations. Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. As I prepared to sleep, I heard wolves howling in the distance. But something was wrong with the sound. Wolves usually howl in harmony, their voices rising and falling together. These howls were different, broken, distressed, like they were afraid of something. I tried to push the thought away, but my grandmother's voice echoed in my memory. When the wolves are afraid, Mixie, that's when you should be afraid too. I told myself it was just the weather affecting their hunting patterns. Maybe the caribou had changed their migration route. Things like that happened sometimes, but deep down something told me this search would be different from all the others. I started tracking at dawn. The hunter's trail was easy to follow at first. 4 sets of boots heading northeast toward the traditional caribou crossing at Wolverine Creek. They were experienced outdoorsmen, I could tell. Their pace was steady, their gear organization was smart, and they'd chosen good camping spots. For the first day, everything looked normal. On the second day, I found their first camp. They'd built a proper shelter, managed their fire well, and disposed of waste correctly. These weren't rookie hunters, but I noticed something odd. Scattered around their campsite were caribou bones, fresh ones, more than 4 people could eat in a week. I radioed back to dispatch. Found first campsite. Hunters appear experienced and well supplied, continuing northeast. The GPS showed I was getting close to where their beacon had activated. That's when the trail got strange. The hunters' footprints led to the edge of a frozen stream, then just stopped. I circled the area 3 times, looking for where they'd crossed or changed direction. Nothing. 4 sets of human tracks ended at the water's edge and nothing came out the other side. I checked my compass. The needle was spinning slowly, never settling on magnetic north. I tapped it, thinking it was broken, still spinning. Magnetic anomaly, I muttered. The aurora borealis could interfere with electronic equipment. I'd seen it before, but my grandfather's star compass wasn't electronic. It was just carved bone and traditional knowledge. According to the stars, I was heading northeast. According to my GPS, I was heading southwest. That had never happened before. I made camp and tried the radio. Static. Nothing but static on every channel. That night the wolves howled again, closer this time. And in the gaps between their cries I heard something else. Something that sounded almost like singing. Deep, throaty voices chanting in a language I didn't recognize. I checked my rifle and kept the fire burning bright. Morning brought fresh snow and a discovery that made my blood run cold. Around my campsite, in a perfect circle, were tracks, but not wolf tracks. These prints were longer than any wolf I'd ever seen, with what looked like fingers. Claw marks, yes, but arranged like a hand. The tracks were huge, bigger than my size 11 boots. I followed them away from my camp, and that's when I found the first hunter. His name was Jim Bradley, according to the hunting license in his jacket pocket. He was alive but in bad shape. Hypothermia, dehydration, and something else. Something I'd never seen before. Jim's eyes were wide open, but he wasn't seeing me. He was staring at something beyond me, something that wasn't there. When I tried to talk to him, he just kept mumbling the same words. Dog faces in the dark. On the ground next to him was a piece of paper, torn from a notebook. He'd drawn pictures on it with a pencil stub, crude sketches but clear enough, wolf heads on human bodies, and at the bottom of the page, GPS coordinates. I gave Jim what water I had and wrapped him in my emergency blanket. He was in no shape to travel, but I couldn't leave him. I activated my own emergency beacon and hoped someone would pick up the signal. As I tended to Jim, he grabbed my arm with surprising strength. They took the others, he whispered, walked like men, ran like wolves, spoke our names. Who took them, Jim? Who? The dog-faced men, just like the old stories. His grip tightened. They're real, Mike. They're real and they're hungry. That night I heard them moving around our camp, circling us in the darkness beyond the firelight. I could see shapes, tall shapes that moved wrong, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. When I aimed my flashlight at them, all I caught were glimpses, grey fur, yellow eyes, and something that looked like hands holding tools. Jim kept drawing more pictures, page after page of the same thing, wolf-headed figures standing upright carrying spears, working together like hunters. They're not animals, he whispered. They plan, they think, they remember. By morning, 3 more sets of the strange tracks circled our camp. And leading away from our position toward the coordinates Jim had written down was a trail I couldn't ignore. 4 sets of human footprints, and beside them, the massive dog-like tracks. Someone was leading the hunters away, or driving them. I had to make a choice. Wait for rescue that might never come, or follow the trail into whatever had taken Jim's hunting partners. I chose to follow, but first, I did something I hadn't done since childhood. I pulled out my grandfather's ivory star map and traced the old symbols with my finger, whispering a traditional prayer for protection. If Jim was right, if the old stories were real, then I was going to need all the help I could get. The trail led deeper into the mountains toward a valley I'd never explored before. According to my maps, it was unmarked territory, no geological surveys, no hunting reports, no ranger patrols, just blank space. I left Jim at a ranger cache cabin with emergency supplies and a note explaining the situation. If someone found him, at least they'd know where I'd gone. The tracks were easier to follow now. The strange dog-like prints were everywhere, sometimes alone, sometimes in groups. They moved with purpose, following game trails and natural corridors through the mountains. Whoever or whatever was making these tracks knew the land well. On the 3rd day of tracking, I found the second hunter. Tom Walsh was hanging 20 feet up in a tree, wrapped in what looked like primitive rope made from twisted hide. He was alive, but barely conscious. When I cut him down, he immediately started crying. "They're not wolves," he sobbed. "They're people, or they were people. They speak English, Mike. Broken English." I gave him water and checked him for injuries. Scratches and bite marks covered his arms and legs, but they'd been treated with some kind of plant medicine. Someone had kept him alive on purpose. "Where are Dave and Rick?" I asked. Tom pointed deeper into the valley. "The big one, the leader. He said they were keeping them for the winter feast, said white men taste different than caribou." "The leader spoke to you?" "In Inupiaq first, then English, Old English like from 100 years ago." Tom grabbed my jacket. "Mike, they've been here forever, living in caves, hunting, waiting. They call this place the Old Boundary." That phrase hit me like ice water. My grandmother had used those words. The Old Boundary was a place in the traditional stories where humans weren't supposed to go, where the first treaty between my people and the Adlet had been signed in blood and starlight. I helped Tom back toward the cache cabin, but he couldn't travel far. I had to hide him in a snow cave with emergency supplies and continue alone. The valley opened up ahead of me, and I saw something that made me question everything I thought I knew about Alaska. There was a village. Not a modern settlement, but an ancient one. Stone shelters built into the cliff faces connected by carved paths. Smoke rose from hidden fires, and moving between the structures were shapes that walked upright but moved with the fluid grace of wild animals. I crept closer, using my army training to stay hidden. They were real. The Adlet were real. 8 feet tall, covered in thick grey fur, with the heads of wolves but the hands of men. They used tools, spears, knives, rope. They worked together to skin caribou and preserve meat, and they spoke to each other in a mixture of Inupiaq and their own guttural language. I watched them for hours, documenting everything in my notebook. Their social structure was complex. The largest male seemed to be the leader, directing hunting parties and settling disputes. Females cared for young that looked even more human than their parents. And the older ones told stories around fires, just like my own people did. These weren't monsters. They were another tribe, another people. They'd been living here for generations, maybe thousands of years, staying hidden from the modern world. But they were also predators. I saw Dave Morrison tied to a wooden post near the center of the village. He was alive but weak. No sign of Rick Patterson, the fourth hunter. As I planned my approach, something went wrong. The wind shifted, carrying my scent into the village. Every adlet stopped what they were doing and looked directly at my hiding spot. The leader, a massive male with silver fur around his muzzle, tilted his head back and howled. Not a wolf howl, but something deeper, more intelligent, a call to hunt. I ran. Behind me, I could hear them coming, not just one or two, but the whole pack. They moved through the forest like flowing water, sometimes on two legs when the terrain was open, sometimes on four when they needed speed, and they were fast, faster than any human could run. I reached a rocky outcrop and turned to face them, rifle ready. The leader appeared at the edge of the trees, flanked by 6 others. In the daylight, I could see him clearly. His face was almost human, but stretched forward into a wolf's muzzle. His hands had thumbs and fingers, but his nails were claws. Intelligence gleamed in his yellow eyes. He spoke, and his voice was like gravel and wind. Inupiat ranger, you follow old paths, you carry old tools. He gestured at the ivory star compass hanging from my neck. Your grandmother's grandmother knew our ways. I know the stories, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Stories. He laughed, a sound like breaking ice. White men think stories are lies, but stories are memory. Your people remember the treaty, the old boundary. You have crossed it. I'm looking for the missing hunters. We know. One is our guest, the others. He shrugged, with very human-like shoulders. Winter comes, food must be stored. Let them go, this doesn't have to end in violence. The leader studied me for a long moment. Then he said something in Inupiaq that chilled me to the bone. The treaty is broken, grandson of Marie Ironcloud. White hunters have taken too much. The caribou grow thin, the wolves go hungry. The boundary must be redrawn. He knew my grandmother's name. If you want your hunters, he continued, you must speak for all humans. Prove your people remember the old ways. Prove you understand the cost of trespassing on Adelaide land. What do you want? His smile revealed teeth like knives. Single combat, hunter against hunter. If you win, you take your people and go. If you lose, he gestured toward the village, you join them for the winter feast. I had no choice. Dave was counting on me, and Tom and Jim were still out there, too weak to survive alone. I accept. The leader's howl echoed through the valley, calling his pack to witness. And somewhere deep inside, I heard my grandmother's voice whispering the old prayers, the ones meant to give hunters courage when facing impossible odds. I was about to find out if the old ways were strong enough to save us all. The Adlet led me back to their village as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. In the growing darkness, the place looked even more ancient and mysterious. Carved bone totems marked pathways between the stone shelters, and the smell of smoke and cured meat filled the air. Dave Morrison was still tied to the post, but he was conscious now. When he saw me, hope flickered in his eyes. Mike, how did you find us? Long story, I said. I'm working on getting you out of here. The leader, who the others called Nuka, gestured for me to sit by the central fire. The entire pack gathered around, maybe 30 of them, from elderly elders to young cubs that looked more human than wolf. The trial begins at moonrise, Nuka said. But first, you must understand what you fight for. An ancient female Adlet stepped forward. Her fur was white with age, and her eyes held depths I couldn't measure. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through old bones. I am Siku, keeper of memories. I was young when your great-grandmother's sister came to us, fleeing starvation winter. We took her in, fed her, sent her back to her people with gifts. She promised the Inupiat would remember, would honor the old boundary. She pointed toward the mountains around us. This valley, these hunting grounds have been ours since the ice rivers carved the land. We hunted here when your ancestors first crossed the frozen sea. We shared the caribou, shared the land. The treaty was simple. Humans hunt south of Wolverine Creek, Adlet hunt north. Both peoples survive. What changed? I asked. White hunters, she said, and her voice carried centuries of pain. They come with guns and machines. They take more than they need. They leave carcasses to rot. The caribou learn fear and change their ancient paths. Our children go hungry. Nooka took over the story. We tried to be patient, tried to stay hidden, but each year more hunters crossed the boundary. Each year less food. This winter will be the hardest without the caribou. He didn't finish, but I understood. The Adlet were facing extinction. The 4 hunters I found, I said. They had permits. They were following the law. Human law, Siku replied. Not the old law, not the treaty written in blood under the star path. She pointed at my grandfather's ivory compass. You carry the memory tools, but do you remember the words? I closed my eyes and reached back into childhood memories. My grandmother sitting by the fire on long winter nights, teaching me the old stories. And slowly, the words came back. Under the dancing lights of the spirits, 2 peoples agree to share the land. The people of the ice hunt where the sun sets. The people of the wolf hunt where the sun rises. Both honor the caribou. Both take only what is needed. Both remember the treaty until the ice melts into the sea. Siku smiled, showing ancient teeth. You do remember. But times have changed, I said. There are laws now, park services, government regulations. I can't speak for all humans. You speak for the humans who understand, Nooka said. You prove that some still remember, or you die trying, and we hunt alone until the white hunters learn to fear the dark. The moon appeared over the mountains, full and bright. Around the fire, the Adlet began a low chanting that seemed to come from the earth itself. Nooka stood and walked to a wooden rack holding weapons. He selected a long spear carved with symbols and balanced it in his hands. Traditional weapons, he said. Traditional rules. You may choose spear, knife, or bare hands. I looked at my rifle, then at the ivory-handled knife my grandfather had given me. Made from walrus tusk and steel, blessed by the elders, carried by my family for 4 generations. Knife, I said. The trial ground was a circle of stones at the center of the village. Torches burned at the cardinal points, casting dancing shadows on the ancient rock. The entire pack formed a ring around us, their eyes glowing in the firelight. Nooka stepped into the circle, and in the torchlight, he looked like something from the oldest nightmares, 8 feet tall, muscles rippling under grey fur, moving with the deadly grace of a born predator. His spear was as long as I was tall. "Begin!" Siku called. Nooka came at me fast, using the spear's reach to keep me at a distance. I had to use every bit of my army training just to stay alive. He was stronger than any human, faster than any animal I'd ever fought. But he was also proud, testing me rather than trying to kill me quickly. I realized this wasn't just combat, it was communication. Each move, each feint, each clash of weapons was part of a conversation older than written language. When I managed to slip past his spear point and cut his arm with my knife, he nodded approval. When he swept my legs and sent me tumbling, he waited for me to recover, instead of finishing me. We fought for what felt like hours. My arms ached, my lungs burned, and sweat froze on my face in the Arctic air. But gradually I began to understand his pattern. He fought like a wolf but thought like a human. Pack tactics but with human intelligence behind them. The breakthrough came when I stopped fighting like a soldier and started fighting like my ancestors. Instead of direct assault, I used the tricks my grandfather had taught me: misdirection, patience, making my opponent come to me. When Nuka lunged for a killing thrust, I sidestepped and grabbed his spear shaft, using his momentum to pull him past me. As he stumbled, I pressed my knife to his throat. For a moment, the entire village was silent. Then Nuka laughed. "Good, you fight like Inupiat, like your people should fight." He stepped back and raised his arms to the pack. "This one remembers the old ways. His word has weight." But the trial wasn't over. "Now you must choose," Siku said, stepping into the circle. "You have proven your strength, but strength without wisdom is useless. You can take your hunters and leave, return to your warm houses and forget what you have seen. Or you can help us redraw the boundary, make a new treaty, one that both peoples can live with." I looked around at the adlet faces surrounding me. These weren't monsters. They were a people fighting for survival, just like my own ancestors had fought when the white settlers came north. "What would a new treaty look like?" Nuka smiled. "You help us create protected hunting grounds where white hunters cannot go. We help you protect the caribou herds from overhunting. Both peoples survive. And if I refuse, then we disappear back into the mountains," Siku said. "And when white hunters go missing in winter, no one will know why." I thought about Dave, still tied to the post. About Tom and Jim, traumatized but alive. About all the future hunters who would come north, not knowing they were crossing an invisible line into ancient territory. "I'll do it," I said, "but you have to release all the hunters, alive and unharmed." "Agreed." Nuka cut Dave's bonds with a single swipe of his claws. "But you understand the price of breaking this new treaty?" I nodded. I understood perfectly. Some boundaries are older than maps. Some laws run deeper than government regulations, and sometimes a park ranger has to protect more than just the land. It took 3 days to get everyone back to safety. Tom and Jim were in rough shape, but would recover. Dave kept asking questions I couldn't answer, so I stuck to the official story: wolf attack, survival against the odds, lucky rescue. The Adlet had ways of making people forget things. Not magic exactly, but something close to it. By the time we reached Fairbanks, the 3 hunters remembered being lost in a blizzard, taking shelter in caves and being rescued by park rangers. Their stories matched well enough to satisfy the investigators. I filed my report carefully. Wolf activity in the northern ranges was increasing due to caribou migration changes. Recommended expanding the restricted hunting zones around Wolverine Creek and the Arrogech Peaks. For safety reasons, of course. 6 months later, the recommendations became official policy. The Brooks Range Wilderness Protection Zone was established, with myself as the primary ranger responsible for monitoring it. Officially, it was about protecting caribou calving grounds and preventing human-wildlife conflicts. Unofficially, I became the liaison between 2 worlds. The Adlet kept their part of the bargain. Hunting parties that respected the new boundaries were left alone. Those that didn't, well, search and rescue calls from the northern Brooks Range dropped to almost 0. Word spread quietly among hunting guides: "Don't go past Wolverine Creek in winter. Bad luck up there." I go back to the village every few months, usually during the dark season when travel is difficult and questions are few. We've worked out a system of communication using traditional markers and old Inupiat symbols. When hunters get too close to the boundary, the Adlet leaves signs. When poachers are spotted in protected areas, I find evidence that makes prosecution easy. It's not a perfect arrangement, but it works. The caribou herds are recovering. The migration patterns have stabilized, and somewhere in the mountains north of Wolverine Creek, an ancient people continues to live as they have for thousands of years. Dave Morrison still sends me Christmas cards. He's back to hunting, but he sticks to southern Alaska now, says the Brooks Range gives him nightmares. Tom Walsh moved to Florida and became a fishing guide. He never hunts anymore. Jim Bradley took up bird watching. He says he likes animals he can identify. Sometimes, on clear winter nights when the aurora borealis dances across the sky, I sit outside my cabin and listen to the wolves sing. But I can tell the difference now between wolf songs and adlet voices. The wolves sing about hunting and territory and pack bonds. The adlets sing about memory. Last month, Nuka's youngest daughter had her first successful hunt. She brought down a caribou using traditional weapons and methods her ancestors had perfected over millennia. Siku told me the story with obvious pride, and for a moment I felt like I was part of something much larger than Park Service protocols and government regulations. I carry 2 sets of equipment now when I patrol the northern ranges, GPS and satellite radio for the modern world, ivory compass and traditional tools for the old one. Both are necessary. Both have their place. The young rangers sometimes ask why I spend so much time in the restricted zones. I tell them someone needs to monitor wildlife activity, check for poachers, maintain the boundary markers. All true, but not the whole truth. The whole truth is that some promises can't be broken. Some agreements are more important than career advancement or bureaucratic convenience. Some boundaries exist for reasons that go deeper than science or law. My grandmother used to say that the land doesn't belong to people. People belong to the land. After 21 years as a ranger, I thought I understood what she meant. Now I know. The Brooks Range holds secrets that change you. Once you've seen the truth behind the old stories, once you've shaken hands with legends, you can never quite go back to seeing the world the way you did before. But I wouldn't change it. Someone needs to stand watch at the boundary between worlds. Someone needs to remember the old agreements and make sure they're honored. My name is Michael Ironcloud, and I guard the space between myth and reality, between ancient wisdom and modern ignorance, between the people who remember and the people who have forgotten. The Arctic doesn't belong to humans alone, and now you know why.